everybody. I'm Jacqueline Pulverari, and we are on another episode of Criminal Justice Cafe. Today we have Lynn Espejo. Did I say that right, Lynn? Espejo?
Espejo.
Espejo. We have Lynn Espejo with us, who lives in Sherwood, Arkansas. You can tell by her accent when she starts to talk. It's wonderful. She is a wife and a mother, and to three grown sons. She is recently home, and I'm going to let her tell her story a little bit. Normally, I go into the beginning of someone's story, but her story is very unique to something that we really want to educate the public about, because there's so many injustices with her story that it's absolutely incredible. So, Lynn, tell us a little bit about how did you get into how did you enter the system? What happened?
Well, from 2007 to 2010, I worked for a group of doctors. And in March of 2011, I went to my mailbox one day and there was a letter in the mail that told me I'd been indicted 3 days before. So I got on the phone with an attorney and I just assumed these doctors had finally got caught for their Medicare fraud because I'd been their office manager. And come to find out, no, I was accused of committing fraud against them. When the lawyer told me that, I was in total shock because this was not something I expected, that I even knew I was under investigation for. That indictment happened in 2011, March 2nd of 2011. It was dismissed in May of 2012 after it came to the attention of the U.S. attorney. I'd been telling him I was innocent of the crime. Well, finally, when we got into discovery, he saw that I was telling the truth, that I had not committed this crime. In fact, the doctors had actually had cause to be destroyed all the evidence in my case, all the financials.
Okay, so tell our viewers a little bit what discovery is, because our viewers aren't involved in the system at all.
When you have a criminal case ongoing, you have a right to certain evidence. And that evidence, the trading back and forth of the evidence is called a discovery phase in the criminal justice system. So you are in essence getting information that the U.S. attorney or whoever's charged you, be it a state case, I guess the prosecutor, you are, have a certain legal right to certain evidence. And that evidence is called the discovery process. Okay. Meaning they're discovering what I guess you're going to say as the defendant, you're discovering what the prosecution side's going to say.
So this happened and then your charges were dismissed.
Yes. However, because the federal government had seized $50,000 of money from my husband and I that belonged to us, that was legally made, had nothing to do with any crime. However, they had put that money into what's called a civil forfeiture instead of putting it into my criminal case. Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, I won't go into all these details, but if they were finagling with that money, the Secret Service wanted it. They had some local policemen help them get that money and hold it because the federal prosecutor did not originally want to take that money, the first AUSA that was on my case. So they kind of did some underhanded things and then finally got it before a federal judge because, mind you, when money is seized, whatever, be it the FBI, the Secret Service, whatever organization seizes it, they actually get that money for their budget. And some of that actually goes to individual, like retirement money.
Right.
So I don't think the American public understands how the Patriot Act works, how these seizure laws, they're very convoluted. Once they take your asset, be it a car, property, money, the money is considered, or the asset is considered to be dirty, part of a crime. It is considered guilty until proven innocent instead of,
yes.
Of course, people think that in our system, you are innocent until proven guilty.
Not how it works.
I promise you that is not how it works. No, you are guilty until you prove otherwise from the very beginning. Yes. But anyway, that indictment was dismissed in May of 2012. However, I was persistent in trying to get our money back because I knew that I had not committed that crime, and I knew that they were keeping our money and not moving forward in the court system. And so I reported the U.S. Attorney's Office all the way to the OIG office in Washington. And they did not like that very much, that I was bringing attention to the fact that they were trying to keep our money, and they just weren't playing by the rules. They weren't playing fair. So
Right.
I reported it. The next thing I know, 2014 rolls around and I'm re-indicted. And not only did they indict me for the crime they indicted me for the first time, which was wire fraud, they added money laundering and tax fraud to it. So they stacked charges to try to entice me into taking their plea deal. They also threatened to indict my husband, who is a CPA, because we filed joint taxes. They were saying that he was going to get indicted as well if I didn't take their plea deal. So they put pressure on you all the way around. And
I don't think the public understands that, which
no,
that happens in every single case that I know of, where if you do not plead guilty, they will go after family members who are tied to
yes,
either for money laundering, for joint taxes, for whatever it is. So it's almost, you have a choice. You love
right.
somebody, do you plead guilty? What do you do? Now, this is crazy because they've already dismissed your charges. Now they came up with new charges, and now they're going to say they're going to go after your husband.
Yes. And actually, they went through the process because an AUSA, people may not know this either, they cannot just charge you with tax fraud. They have to actually go through the DOJ tax department and get an approval for a tax fraud charge. They went through the entire process and got approval to charge both me and my husband, believe it or not, who never worked for those doctors, had nothing to do with anything with those doctors. They actually got approval to charge him with tax fraud as well. However, they did not indict him. They immediately offered him they kept calling him. He never would take their calls. I went before the grand jury and spoke because I'd already been indicted once, and I was like, no, I demand to go to the grand jury this time.
Right.
And so I went to the grand jury, told them my side of the story, or tried to tell them my side of the story. However, that's another process the American people have no idea about. The
No.
grand jury is ran by the AUSA, the prosecutor. They bring them donuts, they get to know them. You're not allowed as a defendant to even be represented by an attorney at the grand jury. You have to go in there by yourself.
Oh, wait, I didn't know that.
Yes, you cannot, an
Wow.
attorney may not go with you to the grand jury. The grand jury is made up of supposedly, people within your community. However, in Arkansas, I don't know how it works in other states. I'm assuming very similar. The same grand jury serves for like 6 months. So they get to know the prosecutors who bring them donuts and coffee and chit chat them up and get to have a personal relationship with them. Whereas people like me, I just go in there and, the saying that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. Well, I truly believe that after seeing the process, because it doesn't really matter what you say. First of all, you don't get a chance to say much. They make sure of that.
Yeah.
You are what the prosecutor does is sit there and just bombard you with questions to where you can't even answer one before they're throwing another one out there. They're trying to get you off balance, confused. And, I was innocent, so my story was not going to change. However, when you don't even know what you're being asked half the time, you can't even fully answer before they're throwing out another question. And this is a process that's also designed only for the prosecutor to win.
It's true.
I mean,
And excuse me, but while all this is going on, were the doctors also being indicted?
oh, absolutely not.
Ah.
Yeah, absolutely not. No.
So the people who owned this business weren't responsible at all. They hired you as an employee and you were the office manager, and you were somehow now responsible for this.
Right.
Whatever happened.
I think
Wow.
what happened was I'll tell you, I've blogged about it. I've put it out there. I've testified to it. It's not a secret. I had worked for a group of doctors, and I was asked to charge things on my personal credit card. One doctor in particular continued to ask me to charge things. He told me he was hiding money from his wife. At one point, did I suspect he might be taking business expenses that were personal? Yeah, I did, but I had nothing to do with his taxes. I didn't have anything to do with what he did. I was just the office manager, and I did not feel that I was doing anything illegal by charging things to my credit card and getting reimbursed.
Right.
However, when things got to whatever happened and the federal government got involved, all of a sudden he denied reimbursing me for things I put on my credit card, and started claiming that he had not authorized any reimbursement to me. Now, mind you, the account that this all happened in was a zero balance account. And I don't think the jury ever understood what that meant. What
Well, you
that
have to
meant
really
was,
be an accountant and a finance major to understand a lot about um, zero balance accounts and how they work and reimbursements. I mean, was the
well,
jury?
no, the federal government voted everyone off the jury that had any kind of financial background, and left me with people that were on the jury that were like housewives, school teachers, people that had no idea. To me, this case, because of my accounting background, I told you my husband's a CPA.
Yeah.
My undergrad is accounting and finance. To me, it was very simple. It's a zero balance account. The only money that went in there, those doctors put in there to pay their bills. So I was accused of stealing $600,000. Where did that money come from if someone didn't put it in there?
Right.
Why did these doctors destroy all the financial documents that should have proved what they said happened?
Wow.
If I was guilty, those documents clearly would have showed that. I don't think the judge understood what a zero balance account was. I know the jury did not. I'm not even sure the AUSA, the government, understood
Yeah.
from the very beginning, because yes, I was reimbursed. In fact, when I saw the number, I'll be honest, I was shocked that over those years, I had actually charged that much for him. I went back and started getting my credit card records. And I was like, oh my gosh, you start adding it up. And yes, I
Yeah.
had charged that much for him, but it didn't seem like it along the way,
Right.
because he would reimburse me, I'd be charging more, so on and so forth. But when it came down to it, I think some of the doctors that came and testified at trial probably were telling the truth, because they probably did believe what they were saying. They probably honestly believed that somehow I had stole from them. However, again, the only money that got into that account was money they wrote in for their bills to be paid. And they had to admit at trial that there was no payroll that wasn't paid. There was no payroll taxes that didn't get paid, and they had no bills that weren't paid.
So,
So
did
again,
anybody bother to do a forensic accounting?
I asked the attorneys I hired to, and I found out at trial they had not even turned over discovery to the government, and I couldn't even put on the exhibits I did want to put on.
Because
This
it's
is
so
how
expensive.
messed up
Nobody
our
wants to
system
try.
is.
Yeah, that's such an expensive forensic accounting. Who wants to do that? And really, it shouldn't be your attorney. It should be the government who would have to do that forensic, because you are innocent until proven guilty.
No,
And that's exactly what doesn't happen.
they put a PowerPoint up there with their theory, mind you, their theory of the case, what they say
Mhm.
happened. They put it up there on PowerPoint. They had the IRS agent who was on their side, obviously, and who I had also reported because he shared our tax returns with my husband's boss, which is illegal, and
Yeah.
nothing happened to him. I mean, he just got by with it. I even reported him to the OIG, and he got by with it.
Mhm.
But you know, he got up there and said I had done all this stuff. In fact, at one point at trial, I leaned over and whispered to my own attorney, and I'm like, if I didn't know the truth, I would buy this. Like, it sounded so believable the way they twisted little things into
Yeah.
big things. And then for the tax fraud, all they did was bring in an IRS agent who made her own spreadsheet on Excel and stuck it up there on a board for the jury to see, that said, this is how much
Wow.
I owed in taxes. And So here's how it goes. They say you stole the money. That's wire fraud. They say you spent money to pay a credit card. And at the time, during this 4-year period, in the last year I worked for them, we actually had a construction loan and built a house. So any check that was wrote for the building of our house, we had a loan. You know, you get a draw and you pay the contractors. Well, lots of those checks were over $10,000. However, that came from a construction loan. And if anybody would have took the time to put that information for the jury, they would have seen that.
Right.
So anything that was over 10,000, they said that was money laundering. And in fact, they had even charged me in the indictment. They had to dismiss one of their counts because they had charged me for a check. We had sold a car back to the dealership for $16,000, and they tried to say that was money laundering, that I had wrote a check for $16,000. And I'm like, no, that's actually a deposit if you look, and that came from the car dealership. So they were very embarrassed, the government, because they'd even put a check that was a deposit as one saying I wrote it. So they dismissed that count. But they say anything over 10 was money laundering. Then they said because you stole money and didn't report it on your taxes as stolen money, as income, that's now tax fraud. So it ends up, you end up owing over 800,000 restitution because they charge you 3 different ways for the same supposed crime.
Yep. So this jury that you had, so the jury then found you guilty.
I went to trial in, mind you, I was re-indicted in October, I think October the 8th of 2014. I finally got to trial in January of 2017. And the trial lasted 8 days, so it went into February.
Oh, that's a long trial too. Oh,
8 days. It was excruciating, especially to sit there and hear people lie on you for 8 days.
And you have kids too, right? Were your kids there?
No. We did not put the kids through trial. So then you get found guilty. I did not get sentenced till November of 2017. Mind you, I was found guilty in February of 17. So I had all those months to sit there with it hanging over your head about what's going to happen. So then I got sentenced in November, and I did not report to prison until February the 28th or 26th of 18. So a whole year and, like 20 days later before I ever even went to prison. It's just sitting there being held, and this case has been held over my head since 2011.
Oh, and that's sick feeling when you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for justice to be over with.
And I had convinced myself, my husband, I truly, because he's a CPA, he knew what the government said was not true.
Right.
I think my CPA husband would know if I somehow had $600,000 extra somehow. I mean, come on, whose husband wouldn't be asking that? And so, again, this just went on and on and on for, so long before I ever got to trial. But we truly believe, because we knew I was innocent, we truly believed once I got to trial, we had convinced ourselves the system was honest, that even though we'd seen how the prosecutor operated and how crooked the system was on those areas, we thought for sure once I got to trial that as an innocent person, I could not be found guilty.
Right.
Well, I'm telling you, when they first started, my husband was sitting behind me and I heard him start sniffing and crying or whatever he was doing. When they first read off, count 1, wire fraud, guilty, honestly, by count 2, I think I just laid my head on the desk and I just didn't even listen anymore. I just didn't care. Once you heard the word guilty and you knew you weren't, I just literally laid my head down on the desk in the courtroom. And I didn't cry. I think I was so in shock. I was so numb. I could hear my husband sniffing behind me. I knew he was crying. But honestly, after that many years of going through this, I just didn't have it in me any longer to even cry.
Yeah,
honestly,
there's no more fight.
I didn't even cry at sentencing.
Yeah.
Because for one thing, I was not about to give the government that at sentencing. I was just like, oh no, you've put me and my family through this. And like I told you when we first started talking, the government wasn't satisfied with what the sentencing chart was going to say. They actually wanted 3 enhancements on me to where I would have actually went to prison for 8 to 13 years. And the sentencing chart, which is what, guides in the federal
Guidelines.
system,
Hmm.
how much you're going to get sentenced to, there's like a whatever, whatever months to whatever months, there's a range. Well, the range ended up being like, I think the top of it was 60 something months. Um, the government, again, wanted 8 to 13 years. And so we argued that. I went and hired a different attorney and wasted 10 more thousand, but I don't feel that it was really a waste because they actually did a sentencing memo and really did argue for me not to get the 8 to 13 years. And so the judge ended up, because I had a lot of character reference letters, and I had, even my pastor came and spoke on my behalf at sentencing. And so the judge ended up giving me what's called a 2-level variance, meaning she went 2 levels down on the
So she
sentencing
downward
chart.
spiral. Yeah, she went downward.
It wasn't an actual departure, it was a variance based on the character reference letters.
Okay.
And the departure, there is departure as well, but that's
Mhm.
based on other things.
Yeah.
She gave me what's called the variance, meaning it was at her discretion to do it.
Mhm.
So she did give me less time than I would have got. But when I heard 45 months, that sounded just like ridiculous forever. However, again, compared to hearing 8 to 13 years, I mean, 45 months sounded pretty good.
Right. And what do you think? If you pled guilty, do you think you would have gotten 45 months?
No, the original, and in fact, it's out there on my blog. People don't have to take my word for this. Go to my blog, Inside the Walls. I have posted their plea offers out there, the government's plea offers. The first indictment, they wanted me to plead to a conspiracy with unindicted, unnamed doctors. Let that sink in. And that plea offer said I was a minor participant in hiding their income, and that I had hid some of my own income, which was, none of that was true.
Right.
I had not hid any income of my own. And they wanted me to get probation, 0 to 6 months. The second indictment, they offered me to plead to tax fraud only. And they wanted me to say that I owed the government $207,000. And I probably would have got, I think they were offering me 2 years, 24 months on that. And I've posted both of those out there.
Yeah. But the bottom line is you didn't do either. Yeah. Why would you plead guilty to something you didn't do?
Right. And I told them both times no. So a week before trial, the first time, because I was going to go to trial on the first indictment, a week before trial, they dismissed their indictment. And then again, the second time, even during the week of trial, they were trying to offer me a plea deal. So I think even though they had their little dog and pony show going, I still think the government, I think deep down they knew I didn't do this. But the second time was all about retribution. I had ticked them off, and they were going to show me who was boss. That
You wouldn't do what they wanted you to do. Right. So then tell me, you went to prison and you were moved around a little bit, right? Is it?
Well, I was at Bryan. I was a self-surrender. And when the day that I was in court, the judge, I had kind of like, once I found out I was going to prison, I had gotten on sites and started doing research and trying to figure out, okay, what am I looking at here? How's it going to be at a women's prison? And honestly, there wasn't a whole lot out there at the time. I found Piper Kerman's book and read it. I, got on a website called, I think, Prison Talk, but the information was very old and outdated. And I ended up meeting Holly Coleman, who was on your show recently. Somehow somebody hooked me up with her. I cannot recall who originally introduced us, but Holly did kind of try to walk me through the system and help me some. And so I kind of started learning what like how it was going to be. And at sentencing, I had been looking into prisons, and it looked like the only women's prison that had a lot of things to do. And I just didn't want to sit around. I wanted to be busy. If I had to go to prison, I wanted to do something. And I noticed that there was a cosmetology program at Bryan, Texas. So I was like, okay, that's 8 hours from my house. It's, it's further than right at the 500 miles that you're supposed to be placed within.
Right.
But, okay, my husband and I talked about it, and we decided that, okay, great. that would give me stuff to do. So I picked Bryan, Texas, not knowing that it was just really a hotbed of staff corruption, and that their Cosmo program was honestly nothing
And
but a big fraud.
let's be clear, because I know you didn't actually pick it. The judge probably recommended it for you.
Right. I picked, like, talking to my lawyer, like, I want to
Right.
go to this prison. So at sentencing, the judge asked if I had a request for where I wanted to go. I guess
Yeah.
they generally do this,
Yes.
and then they recommend it. Granted, there is no guarantee,
No.
because you are actually, once the judge sentences you and does what is your commitment and judgment, that gets forwarded to the BOP in Grand Prairie, Texas, which is the designation center, and they're the ones that actually designate you.
Right.
Again, they do look at what the judge recommends. A lot of times, though, those recommendations are based on people that can do RDAP or certain programs that are only at, certain prison camps or
Specific, yeah.
certain prisons. But if you request to go somewhere and the judge puts it, I guess, in your commitment and judgment, I guess they at least consider that.
Yeah, they do.
So I was
do.
designated to Bryan, Texas, and I was a self-surrender, meaning I got to walk into prison. My husband and I flew to College Station and took an Uber, and the Uber driver got to be part of my self-surrender. In fact, I took his picture because he was so shocked when he was
driving you to prison.
When he was taking us to the prison, he was like, "Well, are y'all going to visit somebody?" And we were like, "Well, no." And he's like, "Well, what do y'all do there?" And I'm like, "Well, actually, you're going to be leaving me, and then you're taking my husband back to the airport." And he was like, "Wait." He didn't even know there was a prison in Bryan, first and foremost. And then when he found out people could just walk into prison, he was like, "They let people just walk in?" I'm like, that
check in. You have to go check in. Yes.
Yes. And in fact, during my 24 months at Bryan, I actually got what's called a furlough. And I actually went out in the community for 12 hours with my husband in the Bryan College Station area. And I had to report back at 8:00 that night.
Isn't that crazy? People don't understand that at all. Yeah, Danbury in Connecticut, they do not give furloughs. That's something. But some of the prisons actually do utilize the furlough.
Well, Bryan didn't either, but I called policy on them and pushed it, and I finally got one. So, but then after I got mine, other people started getting them as well. So, that did work out for other inmates, that I was very proactive on holding the BOP, or at least trying to hold the BOP accountable for policy. I was, needless to say, not a staff favorite for my policy.
I could imagine.
My administrative remedy write-ups. I learned policy, and I'll tell you why I learned policy. For 9 months, I was just trying to do my time and just get by. I was the reentry clerk. I worked in that job. I decided to take the Cosmo because, like I told you, that was one of the things I looked at. I was like, if I'm gonna have to go to prison, let me make it worth my time. I'll learn something. And so I thought learning hair would be fun. So that was one reason I wanted to go to Bryan, was they had a cosmetology program, and it's minimal cost or free to inmates. Well, Bryan's is a federal grant program, so it's free to inmates. So I signed up, and I was one of 25 inmates picked to be in the class that year, because it's a year program. Well, we weren't but about a month into that program, and we started being asked to sign paperwork for hours we were not getting. So basically, on paper, it looked like they were doing this class, but in reality, yes, they were doing it, but not really. I mean,
yeah. Well, they were taking the grant money, and they
were doing the class, but not the hours that you were supposed to get. So basically, you were learning some things, but not, what you were supposed to. And I was already serving time for a fraud I didn't commit. So I was not real happy when I was asked to sign this stuff. And I just kind of told them, I went and talked to the head of the education department. I said, "Look, you may not know this, but the instructor's asking us to sign hours that we're not getting in Cosmo. And she told me, she was like, well, maybe you're just not cut out for the class. Like, what? So it was obvious she knew and was in on it.
Yeah.
Well, so I didn't know what to do at that point, but I wouldn't sign it. And then about a week later, she came over to our unit and called me out and kicked me out of class. So I was pretty indignant that, really, I'm trying to do the right thing here and you're going to put me out of this class. And so I started writing admin remedies. I went and learned policy and started writing admin remedies around this same time, around I think this was in November of 2018. And remember, I had self-surrendered in February. So I was not even a year into my sentence yet when this happened. But I had been blogging the entire time about my prison experience. But it was mainly just how I felt, sleeping on a little cot that looked like a kindergarten mat, just things like that. Nothing.
So when you say blogging, because there's no computers in prison, were you emailing through core links?
Yes,
So people understand.
I would type up whatever I wanted to say on my blog that I started
Okay.
before I went to prison. I would email it to my friend who was an approved contact, and she would go out and post it for me.
Which is perfectly fine.
Right. Yeah. There's no BOP policy
No,
that
there's
says
not.
you cannot even have a Facebook page as
Yeah.
long as you're not being paid. That's what the policy says. Well, when November rolled around, I got kicked out of Cosmo. I started writing them up, trying to get back in. I had my husband contact my state senator and tell him what was going on. And I started communicating with him through Core Links, his office, flat reporting what they were doing, where they could read it. They read everything. I was just in their face with it. I was like, okay, y'all want to violate my rights? Guess what? Now I'm going to start talking.
Mhm.
So on my blog, I started blogging about their corruption. And the first blog that I put out about their corruption, the title of the blog actually is Corruption at the BOP. And shortly after that, I received what's called an incident report. A shot is what inmates call it, meaning you have been written up for a violation that can get you good time taken. It can get your commissary. It can get, there's all
It
kinds
can take
of
away, phone privileges to talk to your loved ones.
Absolutely. So I was written a shot for what they wrote me up for was, I think it's 396. It's called circumvention of email is what they wrote me up for. Well, I went to the team. They have to team you, meaning you have to meet with your case manager, and they have to tell you, exactly what it is they say you did. Well, I went and read policy on inmate discipline, and I had all my ducks in a row because I knew I had not violated this. I knew I was allowed to blog. I knew I was not getting paid. There was nothing I had done wrong. So I had a list of questions, and I told her, I want these answered before I go before the disciplinary hearing officer, who would be seeing me on a computer from somewhere else, a region, I believe, or wherever the disciplinary hearing officer was. So I had a list of questions like, how did I circumvent? Because first of all, I was talking to an approved contact, and I was sending stuff to an approved contact. So I had my whole list. And at the very last question, I said, I told her, I said, and be sure to let them know that this is a violation of my First Amendment rights to free speech. If I'm found guilty of this, I will appeal it all the way to Washington. Then I will file something with the court if I'm found guilty of it. And I will let the court know that the BOP is violating my rights. I'm not going to just walk away. You're not going to pin this shot on me. Right. So anyway, 20 minutes later, she calls me back to her office and says, that shot's been a sponge. Legal at Region, and I was like, well, I want copies of everything. And they were like, well, no, we shredded it. There's no proof of it. Well, I kept trying to mail the original shot home to my husband. And every time I tried to mail it out of there, he never could get it. So finally, what I did was I mailed some books home, and I just stuck it in a book and mailed it home. But in the interim, I made a copy of the shot. And they cannot keep you from sending things to senators' offices. So what I did was I mailed it out to my senator under special mail because, again, I learned policy, and policy says
legal mail and special mail, they have to let out.
Right. So, And I told the warden, y'all want to kick me out of Cosmo for trying to do the right thing? My goal now is going to be to write this institution up for everything y'all are violating. And the list is real long. So about 3 months into me being kicked out of Cosmo, my senator had gotten involved. I had written up the institution to the point they sent one of their staff members. They had just been holding all my admin remedies at the institution level. And they sent one of their staff members with a stack about so big. It was probably 2 inches thick of write-ups of BP. I'd gotten to 9s on them. 9.
What? 9? Yeah.
9 goes to the warden. 10 gets to regional, and 11 Washington. The only one that ever made it to 10 was the one about me being kicked out of Cosmo. That was the first one I wrote. Well, after that, I told the warden, my goal is to do 3 a day. I'm going to write y'all up for 3 things a day. That's my goal, 3 BP8s. So I would go in and I would say, I need, BP8s. And at first they were like, well, you can only get 1 at a time. And I was like, where's that at in policy? So if you don't give them to me, I'm writing you up too. So then they'd be like, here's 10.
They wanted you out of there, Lynn. They were saying, you know what? They need to pass something to get this woman home.
Yeah. So like I said, I had a stack sitting there that they'd never let off the compound. And they came to me, they sent one of their staff members who I really actually had a lot of respect for, because she didn't like what was going on. She knew that I was in the right, and she really didn't like what was going on there. But she was powerless because, again, she was at their mercy. But anyway, so about 2 inches thick worth of them, they sent her 3 months into this, and they wanted to make a deal with me. And I could go back into Cosmo because apparently, I didn't know this at the time, but Region had tipped them off that they were fixing to rule in my favor. And they were going to force them to put me back in the Cosmo class. In the interim of this, they had written me 2 other false shots that I had also beat. So I had learned policy, and I had beat all 3 of the false shots they wrote on me, yet here Region was about to rule in my favor and had already ruled in my favor on the other shots. So, I was like 3 for 0 with them at this point, and had a stack sitting there waiting to get off the compound on them. And then the one that did get off the compound was about to be ruled in my favor. So they came to me and wanted to know if I'd make a deal. And I was like, well, what kind of deal? Because I'd been getting shook down, just all kinds of retaliation, trying to make me quit. And it had
And
not
just
worked.
so our listeners know, when you say shook down, is the correctional officers will come in your room in the middle of the night, anytime they want to, and everything in your room gets tossed so they can find something that you shouldn't have.
And they never could find anything.
Yeah,
They
because most women,
they resorted to taking my commissary, making me prove that I'd bought it, because they could never find, I didn't have contraband, and they could never find anything. However, even the officers got tired of that, because what I would do is whoever was on duty, I would just have a BPA wrote with their name on it saying they retaliated on me and they shut me down, and just in case they were going to, and I would have it in the very front of my locker. So when they opened the locker, here is an admin remedy on them. The officer that's about to shake me down
is going to see the 9 as soon as he opens it up.
Become retaliation. And so I'm like, in fact, officers would even tell me, like, they would, one night I got shook down and a lot of commissary got took, and it was a lieutenant. And he told me I wasn't going to get it back. And I'm like, well, we'll see. And I was quoting policy to him. I said, I have 120 days to pill it, so do not throw it away. You better have it in your office waiting on me to get it back, because I'm going to get my commissary back. If it's expired, I'm going to file a tort claim, and you're going to have to pay me for it. And I was telling him all the rules, right? And he was like, well, we'll see. So he leaves. After the 10 o'clock count, lights are out. It's dark. I hear the guard, Espejo. Room 52. And I go out to the catwalk because I was on the 2nd floor, and I look down and she's like, come here. And I'm like, okay. And I go down there. She goes, come in the middle. And so they had offices between 2 units. And she has all my stuff that the lieutenant said I wasn't getting back spread out on a table. And she's like, is this everything? And I'm like, I don't know, I guess. She goes, it's all yours. Take it, take it. I don't want any trouble with you. You've not given me trouble. I don't want any trouble. I don't want to be written up. I don't want, she did not want to be on the other side of an admin remedy. So she went against the lieutenant and gave me my stuff back. But anyway, after the 3 months, getting back to the stack of admin remedy I had, they sent somebody I respected, a staff member, to come talk to me. And she wanted to make this deal that they would put me back in cosmetology. I did not have to clock any false or write any false hours. I would do it by the book, and I would take back all those nines, the 2-inch stack that was sitting there. So I told her, I said, well, yeah, I'm willing to do that. However, I want the originals back. If I am messed with in any way, if I'm taken back out of cosmetology, if I'm asked to clock false hours, then what's going to happen is I'm writing all of them back, and they will get to Washington this time. I will not ever take them back again. So they agreed to it. They made me sign off, and they made me write a letter to Region saying that I didn't want them to rule on the one I had sitting there, which was about to let me back in Cosmo anyway. I didn't know that at the time. She didn't tell me that till months down the road. By the way, they were ruling in your favor, is why the warden agreed to this. I'm like, okay, whatever. It didn't matter. At the time, I just wanted to be doing something productive. So I agreed to it. And again, it was never my goal to write them up. What I find comical is that this recent, well, I'll move on along. I got out on the CARES Act. I've been home for 8 months. In January was 8 months.
Okay.
And I was put back in to the county jail by the BOP again in retaliation. And the way
you weren't put back into a camp. You were put into a county jail.
Right.
With handcuffs, the whole thing.
I had put in a transfer to go to Carswell, which was in Texas as well, because my husband
I know where Carswell is.
And instead, I got put, and I was told I could furlough there because mind you, I'd had the 12-hour furlough. Carswell was 50 miles up the road. Furlough between camps is not unheard of. In fact, it's common.
Right.
Okay. Instead, I put in to go to Carswell. The next thing I know, I'm on Con Air, Marshall Airlift, shackled, chain, handcuffed, the whole 9 yards, going to Aliceville. Okay.
Now, this is after you've been home.
No. This is when I was still at Bryan.
Okay.
In February of 20.
Okay.
But however, I truly believe that was also retaliation by Bryan staff, because I had been blogging about the PREA violations, which is the Prison
Rape
Elimination Act, that were going on at Bryan. And they were ticked. I had been thrown in the shoe a couple of times for blogging there, and they had threatened to ship me, and it didn't deter me. I just kept blogging. And so I ended up at Oklahoma at the transfer center. And that's where I got out under the CARES Act. I never made it to Aliceville. And I got out in May of 20 from Oklahoma after serving almost 100 days in a cell by myself, which is solitary confinement, and being quarantined in the men's shoe with men in adjacent cell, which is a huge violation of BOP policy. So let me just lay that out there. So I get home. I'm home for roughly 8 months. I have not violated one thing, but however, I am continuing to blog. I have a radio show called Inside the Walls and Beyond, and I'm speaking out on podcasts such as yours, talking to people, making the BOP's, discretions known.
Yeah.
So I blog on December the 22nd about a billboard that is circling Bryan Prison. Women had not been allowed to call home or have visits or anything in 8 weeks. And this is during Christmas and Thanksgiving. And we're a few days before Christmas, okay? So this mobile billboard was hired by a nonprofit to circle the prison to bring attention to it. All I did was blog about the pictures that were sent to me. Well, Piper Kerman.
Woo! There goes all my pens.
Piper Kerman retweeted my blog post on Twitter, and of course you can imagine it went viral. So the BOP in Bryan, their SIS staff sent an email to my future PO, meaning my probation officer. Mind you, I'm still on an ankle monitor at this time. I am still under the BOP. I'm still under the halfway house. but they sent the email to my future probation officer. And I truly believe they were trying to undermine me with her before she ever had the opportunity to meet me.
Get to know you.
So I get a call from my case manager at the halfway house, and she asked me, did I hire this? The allegations in the email was apparently that I had hired this mobile billboard, that the billboard had turned around on federal property, which kind of hints at the fact that I'd committed another crime because I'm getting someone to get on federal property and do something. And that it had a link to my blog. And it also said I was communicating with inmates at Bryan through CoreLinks, through their email program. So the case manager asked me about the billboard, and I'm like, no, I did not hire it, but what if I did? Like, what rule is that? So she, couldn't tell me. Then she said, well, and there's a link to your blog. And I said, yes, and what is the problem? Because I've been down the road with the BOP already and won that one. So what am I doing wrong by blogging? It's freedom of speech. Well, she didn't know what to say to that. Then we get to their allegation that the truck turned around on federal property. And I'm like, okay, even if I did hire it and it turned around on federal property, that's the driver, not me.
That's right.
Okay. Then she says, are you communicating with inmates? And I said, yes. And I also sent Christmas cards to the prisons. And she said, well, you can't do that. And I said, well, what rule is that? Because the only thing your orientation in your manual tells me is I can't use my cell phone to call other halfway house residents or text or call inmates at an institution. It does not.
Because at this point, and let me, I'll interrupt you for one moment, is so our listeners understand, when you come home and you're on probation, in every woman's J&C judgment and commitment, and will say you are not allowed to have any communications with another felon. However, you, Lynn, were not in probation. You were still considered in prison. So while you're in prison, of course, you're communicating with other inmates because you, even though you're on home confinement, you are still considered in prison.
Right. And I was communicating through CoreLinks, which is actually the BOP's monitored system for inmates. Okay. Right. So everything you write is being reviewed by staff. However, even though I'm on probation now, the rule actually says you may not knowingly associate with other felons.
Right.
However, the word association, and this is straight from my probation officer and the court, means association in a criminal manner. It does not mean I cannot talk to other felons. I cannot have other felons come over for dinner. I cannot go, to a restaurant with another felon or be on a podcast with another felon or have them on my show. That communication is strictly in a criminal sense. So I cannot go get in the car with another felon and there be a gun in there, drugs, what have you. We can't go rob a bank. We can't, commit a crime. That's the association that rule is referring to. Being able to talk to other felons, and again, you have to do what your probation officer tells you. So if they tell you you can't have, communication with other felons, because maybe in some instances there are reasons for that. However, I'm on probation now. I do not have that rule. My probation officer has given me permission, to be on my show, to do shows, to whatever. I just have to let her know I'm going to do it, just so that she knows. But however, I have no restriction she told me I can communicate through CoreLinks, whatever I want to do. Right. As long as it's not in a criminal manner, she has no problem with it. She never understood why Bryan contacted her. She didn't, again, the day that my case manager at the halfway house told me that, I said, I would like to know my probation officer's name and phone number because I'm going to call them. I didn't know if it was a he or she at the time, because I don't want this to be the first impression that I'm out committing some kind of rule violations here. So I did call her at that time, even though she was not over me. And she actually came by a few days later, introduced herself, and she really did not understand what I had violated at all. So fast forwarding, that conversation happened with my case manager. She told me they were not going to pursue it, the halfway house. in that same conversation, she did tell me that I could not communicate any longer. And I said, well, how's that going to affect my radio show? And she goes, what radio show? And I said, well, the one I've been doing for 8 months since I've been home. Like, I mean, this is not.
And it's a fantastic radio show, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, what? And so she said, well, I don't think you can do that. You need permission from the BOP. So that started a whole nother cycle of me needing permission. So I sent her the policy, that BOP policy 1480, I think 05. It's the news media. And it clearly shows the only reason I would need permission is if they wanted to come into the prison to interview an inmate. If you're on the outside, there's nothing about home confinement needing it. So that began a whole nother argument with the BOP because Sean Smith, who is the manager that at the region level over halfway houses, he's in Dallas. He was saying no, that I couldn't do it. And I'm saying, well, what about the Michael Cohen case? Here's the link to that case. What about this policy? And I'm sending them their own policy. And I'm telling them, there's nothing preventing me from doing this. Y'all are violating my First Amendment rights to free speech here. And I said, I'm going to appeal it all the way to Washington. I'm going to file with the court after. I mean, I was letting them know I'm not going to, go away quietly on this. That was on a Friday. And he told me I could not do my show that Friday night. So I didn't do the show, but I told them that someone else would come on my show and they would let my listeners know that I was being prevented by the BOP from doing my show.
Right.
And so that was on Friday, January the 8th. On Tuesday, January the 12th, I'm at my church working and I get a call from the halfway house from his name is Michael South. He's the director. And he tells me that I have to report immediately back to the halfway house because I'm being violated and the marshals will be taking me back to prison. So I call my husband and he's like, you're joking, right? I'm like, no, I wish I was joking, but meet me at home because I need to take my car home. I need to take off my jewelry. I mean, I got to go to prison. So, I'm surprisingly calm, to be honest. Because I had predicted just that Monday, the day before on my blog, that I was going to be retaliated on like this. I just had a feeling that the BOP was fixing to retaliate based on my experience with them at Bryan. So I come home, I get ready, I go to the halfway house, the marshal picks me up, I get in the car in the backseat of his cruiser. Mind you, I'm shackled, handcuffed, belly chained, the whole thing again. And he's fixing to take me to the local county jail. And he goes, what'd you do, flunk a drug screen? I was like, no, I don't do drugs. He goes, well, you don't look like the type. In fact, you don't look like anybody I've ever taken back to prison. And I said, yeah, I'm white collar. I don't do drugs. He goes, well, what are you being violated for? And I just handed him the shot because when I got to the halfway house that day, I had received an incident report. And the only thing it said was that I had emailed with other inmates. Okay. The only email quoted was an email that gave an inmate the phone number to call into the show, to the radio show. So the BOP showed their hand right there. They're mad that I'm speaking out and they want to silence me. However, I found out that also at this same time frame, I didn't know this at the time, the Texas Department of Labor, who I've been cooperating with about the fraud at the cosmetology there, because they're asking me questions and I'm telling them the truth about everything. They had tried to get information from Bryan and Bryan wouldn't give them anything. So they knew this 2 weeks before I was violated. So I got a feeling there's a little bit more behind the scenes than the radio show and my freedom of speech.
So let me ask you a question. What do you say to people? Because I'm sure there's people out there that say you're a troublemaker. You just want to, it would be so much easier if you just do what you're supposed to do and you wouldn't have gotten. What do you say to those people? Because I don't think they understand.
Yeah. Here's what I say. When you go to prison for a crime you didn't commit, okay, right. I have to believe that God allowed me to take that journey for some reason. And I was angry at first about it. I was very bitter. I was like, God, I'm mad at you. Why are you allowing this? You know I'm not guilty of this. And I was. But as I got to prison and I started seeing the systematic corruption and the fraud there, and I started speaking out about it, and I would pray about it, be like, okay, God, this just got me shook down. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm kicked out of Cosmo.
It's exhausting. It's
Yeah.
exhausting. And I have to commend
And
you because women don't speak out and they should.
no, but I feel like when I would pray about it, all I ever got was move forward, move forward. And even when I was sitting back at the county jail here recently and I'm being violated, and I know I'm fixing to probably stay out there till June because I was supposed to get off the ankle monitor May 4th. And I'm thinking they'll take 30 good days to punish me. That's going to get it
Yeah.
to June 3rd. I already calculated. I knew, you know, and I'm probably going to get some diesel therapy being moved around to a bunch of county jails before I got my way back
You
to
already know.
Oklahoma,
Yeah.
to Aliceville. And
You
then,
already
you know,
know.
by that time I'd be released again. You know, it was just going to be, you know, nothing but punishment. And here's the other kicker. The BOP had to approve me to finish my graduate classes this semester. I had to pay for them, but they had to approve it. January the 13th was when my classes were starting back up, and they put me back out there on January the 12th. Okay. The email that came from Brian was sent on December 23rd. So I don't think it's a coincidence that they put me back in the day before I was supposed to start back to my graduate classes. In other words, you're not going to graduate this semester either.
Yeah.
Well, so this marshal is taking me back to the county jail, and I hand him this incident report about the emails. He reads it and he looks back at me and he's like, wait, I'm taking you back to jail for emails? I was like, yes, sir. He sit there for a minute and we're driving down the road, and he looks in the, after we start driving, he looks in the rearview mirror. He goes, what'd you really do? And I start laughing. So I tell him what really had just transpired. He goes, oh, I knew it was something more than emails. He goes, I've never taken anybody back unless they flunked a drug screen. So we get to the county jail, and he goes in there with me and stays until they take me to a cell. And he says, what's the name of your blog? He writes it down. He's like, I want to read it. I want to, he goes, you know, I work for the government, but I do know they're corrupt. I mean, he basically said they're crooked.
Yeah.
And so he writes my blog down, and who knows, maybe he's reading it. I don't know. Before I was taken that day, I did call the probation officer and I let her know that I was being violated. She was quite shocked. And I later found out she had tried to call the halfway house. And even though they had been calling her, asking her, could I leave the district for classes, asking her what to do about that email, had I violated anything? Well, all of a sudden, they refused to talk to her. However, when I was getting this incident report and at the halfway house, they made it clear to me that this came from the BOP. They did not want to write this incident report. They did not want to violate me. They had no issue with the 8 months I had followed their rules. So this came directly from the BOP. Not only that, the incident report I was given was a 309, which is not supposed to be decided at DHO.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be decided at the institution level, meaning the halfway house in this example. And they also forced the halfway house to move it to a DHO shot. So I go out to the county jail, and they do not follow BOP policy and come out there to do their team, which is their interview of me about the shot within their 5 days. When the 14th day rolled around, they had not brought me before the DHO. But what they did not know is at the 1st of December, I had filed my own pro se motion for compassionate release with my judge. And I had asked to get off the ankle monitor to go straight to my probation. Because to graduate this semester, I have to do my last internship, meaning I had to go work in a mental health facility. And with the ankle monitor on, that was going to be really hard to do.
Yeah. It scares patients too.
And also, because I was housed in such conditions during COVID at Oklahoma, I have suffered from anxiety, PTSD, things that I did not have prior to prison. And I had been asking the halfway house to get me counseling, and I had proof. I had letters that I had put it in writing, and they had not gotten me counseling yet. Well, it's not really them, it was the BOP. And I had also made the judge aware of that, and that if I could go through the court to get counseling, it'd be $10 copay, whereas our insurance was going to be really a big copay and not pay for it. And on top of it, the halfway house, had not even worked with the BOP to get it, or the BOP wasn't getting it. Now, after I filed that, they started having a mental health counselor call me wanting to set up a group session. Like, I want
Group
individual. I don't
session with
want,
who?
but for counseling.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm like, I don't need group therapy for anxiety and PTSD. I mean, I'm almost finished with my master's in mental health counseling here. I do know I need individual counseling, okay? So anyway, they had started trying to now say, okay, we're going to get you some. And I had been called a couple of times, but that was only the week before I got put back in the
And
county
think
jail.
about this, Lynn. Every woman who goes to any prison should automatically get mental health treatment when they come home.
Yes. Yes, because
Automatically. And then
the abuse by
halfway
the
house is
staff
doing,
there,
yeah.
I mean, listen, and there's women there that already had traumas and other things happen. It's a lot.
Most of
And
the women end up in prison because of mental health issues. So now
absolutely.
you're having them come home and transition to halfway house or home confinement, and they're getting no treatment at all. They've gotten no programs inside prison. The system is just.
And they take off all their meds when they get there. I
Yeah.
saw ladies that were taking off meds for bipolar even. And
Oh yeah, and they go through all kinds of withdrawal, and they just leave them there to withdraw. They take
and then the guards mistreat them because they act out, but they're acting out because of their mental illness. It's just a vicious
Yes.
cycle. I
because
saw it.
everyone is taken off and put on Boost Bar. Everyone gets put on Boost Bar.
They didn't even give them that at Bryan. They just made them cold turkey take off of stuff.
And you
It
get
was
seizures.
horrible.
If you stop your antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication, you can go into heavy seizures.
It was horrible what I saw happening, and that would be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had this motion pending, and on the 14th day, the judge ruled in my favor. I think the PO, my probation officer, had a lot to do with that. She was contacting the court. She gave them the email she had gotten. I had my husband from the county jail. I typed on a tablet what I wanted the judge to know, and had my husband file it along with a copy of the halfway house rules, BOP policy. I let the cat out the bag that I was cooperating with an investigation against them. I mean, I just put it all out there. But in the meantime, she did rule in my favor, and she gave the BOP, she ruled in my favor on January the 26th, which was day 14. She gave them till 3:00 the next day to release me. I was released about 1:00, and she put me to my probation officer.
And now your poor husband needs mental health treatment because he had to deal with you for the last.
Listen, he saw what I went through at Bryan, and it was a lot.
It's scary for loved ones.
He came to get me in Oklahoma on the day that I was supposed to be released, only to be told that they had not quarantined me by CDC guidelines, and he had to come back in 2 weeks later. So I was originally supposed to get out on May 14th. I didn't get out till May the 27th. Because
it's really bad for family members and loved ones. They don't take into consideration how hard it is, especially for a man to watch their wife go through something. And men are men just want to fix it for you. They want their wife to be okay, and it's out of their hands. And that control issue, it's terrible with men, with what men go through.
One of the saddest things that my husband and I always talked about when he would come to visits was little kids hanging onto their mamas that, we're at a camp. These people could have been on probation in the community, serving their sentence in some other way, and raising their children. Yes. It is so scarring to children. If you ever look at the data out there and read what children who have had a parent go to prison say, they have scars that they can never get over, because it's detrimental to children to lose a parent to prison and to have to go visit their parent. Families are put through this, they can be searched. They have to empty their pockets.
True. I did a podcast with my daughters, and my daughters went in pretty heavy and deep into what they went through in visitation, and to see their mother who should have been home. And
right. My friends that came to prison said they were even treated ugly by the guards. They even told a guard one day, can't you smile? Like, are you not happy at this job? I mean, I was like, why did you say that, Gina? I mean, you're not going to get in a visit. But they were like, one of them was even made, they saw someone else get in with shoes that were a certain way, but they were made to go back to the car and put on different shoes.
Yeah. No inconsistencies, none, zero inconsistencies, which is one of my big things. Just making it consistent across the board.
Just follow policy, again, back to the troublemaking thing. Hey, all I was asking them to do was to follow their policy. I didn't come up with that policy. They did.
That's
so
right.
By writing administrative remedy, that is by policy. That is something an inmate has a legal right to do. It is BOP policy. That is asking them to follow their policy. They write the policy. Why are you not following it? Why are your staff not trained in it? Why are they violating it?
I am so impressed because I can't tell you the amount of women who won't write those remedies because they're afraid of the retaliation. They don't want to do it. And
oh yes, they would come to me and say, hey, can you write this up? This is what's going on. Can you write this up? And by the time I left Bryan, I also had gotten so efficient at BOP policy that I was actually helping other inmates beat their false shots. So I was definitely not liked by the staff at all. However, the day I was leaving, my unit manager, who I knew didn't like me because, again, I was helping other inmates beat shots, and I even wrote her up at one point for her withholding mail from Region, and that was sent to me. So the day that I was leaving, she did tell me, she said, Espejo, I didn't like it that you helped other inmates. I didn't like it that you wrote us up. She goes, but I will tell you this, I've worked at 5 prisons, and you're the only inmate that I can truly say, I believe you. You probably are innocent.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I am, but that's neither here nor there because I'm still serving time. So either way, I'm paying a debt to society, whether I owe it or not.
Well, what's next for you, Lynn? What are you going to be going and doing next?
Well, this May, unless something happens this semester and I don't pass the one class and don't finish my internship I'm in, I will graduate with my master's in mental health counseling that I had to put off when I self-surrendered. I would have graduated that semester, but I had to go to prison instead. And so I'm finishing those last 2 things. I'm hoping to continue doing my radio show. I am going in on a little adventure with Holly Coleman, who was recently on your program, on her podcast called Beyond the Game. And I'm going to start being a regular on that.
So how do people get in touch with you? And tell us your radio show. How do they listen?
Okay. It is produced by Larry Levine, Street Justice.
Larry's wonderful.
And it is Justice Broadcasting Network. And the name of the show is Inside the Walls and Beyond. You can find me on Twitter and at Walls underline, I think, Inside. Look me up on Twitter. Look me up on Facebook. I have a Facebook page. My blog is Inside the Walls. It's on WordPress. You can read all the way back.
I read it.
It's through my case all the way through current. In fact, I just blogged the other day about a very brave inmate out of Bryan that sent a 7-page letter detailing the corruption at Unicor there. Your listeners may want to read up on that because she's very detailed and she's very brave because she's still behind the walls. And so you can read that. I blog about different things. Walt Pablo just wrote an article about me being taken back to jail. So that's in Forbes magazine. But my email address is on my blog site. I'm going to continue. I do podcasts. I've been on John Audemot's show. I've been on, several different people have asked me on their podcast. And I'm going to continue doing that. And really, the BOP is not going to shut me up. I'm just going to get louder.
And it sounds like you have wonderful things coming up. So keep us posted, and you have to come back.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to write a book too.
Oh, your story is amazing.
My husband wants me to write a book, and I kind of have started it, but I I'm not very consistent because I've got so many other things going on, and people reach out to me all the time. I'm working right now with some people trying to help them write some compassionate releases for their loved ones, and let me just put this out there: I'm not charging for that, so I want to make sure that's out there. But I am trying to help. When people reach out to me, I do feel compelled to help them if I can.
I do the same. And I know I stack my time and I get overwhelmed, but it is so worth it. It really is.
There's just so many people needing help. There's so much injustice out there. I mean, my goal is to help women mainly, but I'm not opposed to helping men, but my goal really is to help women. And I want women to understand that they have value and worth, and no matter what they've been through, they are still a valuable person. And everybody deserves a second chance, whether you committed the crime you went to prison for or you didn't. You are deserving of a second chance.
Yes,
And
you are.
you know,
I believe that wholeheartedly. And as you know, that is my number one stance right now. And my purpose is to get it, and a true second chance, not
yes,
a second chance where you can get a job, but a second chance where your record is eventually expunged after you have worked towards it. That doesn't happen.
it should be. You should not have to live a life, at my age, I'm older, I'm 56. So if I'm a felon the rest of my life, it's not as daunting on me as a lot of the people I served time with that were in their 20s.
Yeah.
And, have a long time to go.
Yeah.
I feel for women that don't have a support system like I did to come home to. And I would eventually like to do something in the reentry arena, but I just don't know exactly how to do that. I do know I will not be starting a nonprofit because I've already served a crime, time for a crime I did not commit. I don't want to get anything that the government can come in and say I did. So I don't know how I'll really start that, but I'm looking at things.
Yeah. Well, I am so excited you came on today, and I can't wait to see all the great things that you have to do. And I'm going to point everybody to your blog. I've read it. Your blogging is amazing, and your radio show is fantastic. So, and I'll have to have you and Holly on, the three of us at one time. That would be a ball. She's awesome.
You got to come on our shows. I mean,
absolutely.
What I try to do with my radio show is have a special co-host. So I'll have to invite you to come be my special co-host and tell us your story at some point. I
would love to. Anytime.
Well, thank you so much for letting me come on and talk to your audience. And I hope that, I encourage more people to speak out. I think the more people that speak out, the more knowledge the American public can start. It's one thing when it's one voice, but when you start having multiple voices telling the same stories over and over, no matter what institution they serve their time at, and
it validates it.
Eventually, maybe the American public will wake up and realize that we are not helping society by mass incarceration, and people are not leaving prison better.
No, they are not.
It's just not. I mean, and most people that, especially anyone at a camp, they're eventually going to be your neighbor at work with you. I mean, don't we want to make society better? I'm not saying if people commit crimes, there should be a penalty for them to serve, but not everyone would have to serve that penalty behind those walls.
And the recidivism rate of financial crime is virtually zero. It may be 2% because you went back. So
but I saw a lot of people serving drug crimes for conspiracies.
Yeah.
And things that, like, had a boyfriend that sold drugs.
So many women. And conspiracy is not. Yeah, people don't understand. Conspiracy is not that you committed the crime, and it's worse than committing the crime. But it isn't. You didn't commit you just happened to be there with your boyfriend or whoever.
Or answered a phone call and handed the phone, or took a message, or handed something out a door. I mean, I've heard horror stories, and I'm talking about women that are serving 25 years and things that are, crazy amounts of time. That's something that really needs to be a focus. And I know there's people out there advocating for that, but that law needs to be taken off the books. To me, that is just unbelievable.
It is craziness. Well, hopefully,
thanks again for having me on, and I appreciate it. And
thank you. And I'll talk to you soon too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.